in the rural areas. So this issue about rural representation versus urban. And so what happens once the chief electoral officer is assigned under this formula, then there is appointed for each of the 10 provinces a commission chaired by a judge. Chief Justice of the province is appointed, and I think it's 2 or 3 persons who are appointed by the then Speaker of the House of Commons, although he can consult MPs. And they're usually experts, and they meet. So much this Saskatchewan group will meet, and they have to look at the map and look at the population changes and redraw the boundaries. Go through a very scientific, it's a very scientific and difficult process, redrawing the boundaries. They come up with a report, and I won't worry about all that. There's public hearings, MPs can have input, but eventually, if the Electoral Commission says those are the boundaries, then those are the boundaries. And the 3 things they have to look at when they're drawing boundaries is try not to destroy communities, try not to draw a constituency right to the middle of the city if you can, because there's a sense of community. The other thing is you're allowed, particularly protect the rural areas, so you can have a derivation within a province of up to 25%. In other words, a constituency can be as much as 25% smaller than the largest constituency and still be allowed. So that does protect the rural areas to some extent. Anyway, they go through these reports and eventually it gets filed as an order, and that's the order for the next redistribution. In this case, that's what happened after 2011, but because there's a time lag. So we had an election in 2011, but it was under the old boundaries because this wasn't in effect. But the last election in 2015 was under the new 338. This election will still be under that because the census isn't until 2021. And if we have a majority parliament another 4 years, I think probably the next parliament will be still elected on this because it takes too long. By 2023, it probably still won't be ready. So you can have up to 2 or 3 elections where it's the same redistribution. The problem with that, of course, in the example I've given, by the time you have a parliament, it can be almost 10 years out of date. But that's just the reality in terms of fair population. So that's the way that's done. And so that determines the 300. That's why we have these 338 individual constituencies. Now, is there any sort of questions about that? Because I did that really, really quickly. Is that all clear to everybody? Yes, sir.
No, I do have a few questions.
Yes, sir.
About Chief Electoral Officer.
Yes.
He receives pay during the whole of his tenure or just for the election?
No, he's a permanent public official, permanent annual salary. He's paid a very high level, top executive category, I believe. And also, he's not a regular public servant in the sense that he's really an officer of Parliament. So, although he's chosen by the government of the day, Parliament, House of Commons has to confirm him, and then he, or it could be she, we've never had a she yet, and then he is entitled to hold office, not like more public servants, until he is age 65. He's guaranteed. He's a bit like a judge. They're 75, and he can only be removed by resolution of the House of Commons. So that's the only way. The government can't remove the chief electoral officer. Parliament itself would have to remove him if he was doing something wrong.
How many MPs are needed, votes MPs are needed to remove?
Well, everything is decided in the House of Commons by majority. House of Commons votes by majority. So theoretically, I guess, you could have them removed by a majority, but it's never happened.
No.
It's not likely. It would have to be he'd have to be guilty of some criminal conduct or something. It would have to be, and he'd probably resign before he was removed. But it's never. But it gives him protection. He's kind of like a judge, so he's independent of the parties and the system. Okay, now what happens is then there's this thing called the Canada Elections Act. It governs all the kind of rules. I just want to go through some of the basic rules for you. Canada's similar to other democracies. Simply put, if you are a Canadian citizen and you are 18 years of age as of October 21st, polling day, you are entitled to vote. There used to be some prohibitions. There's virtually none. And there's been a recent change, which I talked about this morning. There used to be a restriction on Canadians living abroad, and some of you will be interested in that. The rule until very recently was if you were a Canadian citizen, but you were away from Canada for more than 5 years. This doesn't include people working for government. It doesn't include people working in the foreign service or the military. That doesn't count. They're just on service of the government. The people who permanently leave Canada to make their life somewhere else, fair enough. And if they're gone for more than 5 years, they lose the right to vote. The current government changed that, went to the last parliament. Now it's unlimited. So theoretically, any Canadian citizen anywhere in the world can vote in this election. There's a difficult process to go through, but they can do it to get a special ballot. They can mail it. So virtually any Canadian citizen worldwide now is entitled to be a voter. in this election, and they're entitled for one vote, and they're supposed to be in the constituency where they reside. And somebody asked me, well, how do you determine someone who's never been to Canada? Where did they last reside? I'd have to ask the Chief Electoral Officer because we don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. But probably leave it up to them to decide which riding they want to be registered in. So the way it works, of course, is that it's one thing to be eligible, but the other thing is, in order for you to actually be able to cast a ballot, you have to be registered. You have to be a registered voter. But again, that's pretty easy now. Elections Canada is updating the list all the time. And in addition, even if you're not registered, for some reason you haven't gone on the vote, the young people often, particularly, don't get registered or they move around a lot, but other folks too. You can go into a polling station as late as polling day itself, election day, October 21st, and if you can prove your ID and that you live in that area, you'll get registered and you get to cast a ballot. So the bottom line is, there's virtually no limitation. As long as you're a Canadian citizen, you're 18 years of age, you make the effort, you can get a vote. It's literally universal suffrage. Suffrage is just a fancy word for eligibility to vote in a parliamentary election. So that's on eligibility to vote. Now the other thing is, the rule is that you normally are only allowed to vote in the area where you live, your ordinary residence. So it's wherever your home is or whatever. And what happens in each of these 338 constituencies, the returning officer, who's the senior electoral official for that constituency, the other job he or she has is occasionally they have to redraw the boundaries. They divide the riding itself into polling places, right? Because you have to have places where people can go. And so the normal is you have to be registered on the list that covers the polling division in which your house is in, basically. But it's easy enough to do that, and you get to cast that ballot. The one exception to that is interesting, is that university students have one benefit nobody else has. If you're a university student, full-time university or college, but you're going to a university that is not your hometown, like say for instance you're from London, Ontario, but you're attending the University of Ottawa this fall. You have a choice. You can vote in London, because that's still your ordinary residence, that's where your parents live, or that was your home. You can vote in that constituency, or you can choose to register and vote in the constituency where the university is, which in this case would be an Ottawa constituency. And students are about the only people who have that technical right. Everybody else only has one place of residence, theoretically. And so anybody can only vote in a designated riding. Students are the one exception. They can choose. They don't get two votes, unless they're breaking the rules, but they can choose. They can either cast a vote where the university is, or they can cast it back at home. And that's a special provision. To my understanding, they're the only group who have that right that I'm aware of. Yes, Rob?
Just one point of clarification on that. So in other words, the vote they cast is where the university is geographically located?
Yeah,
or
correct.
their address in Ottawa?
No, where the university is situated.
Oh.
Not their address, because the university has an address. In fact, Elections Canada put polling stations right in the university. So the students don't even have to vote in the polling station when, say, they're living, no, good question. It's actually the address of the university. So there will be a separate polling divisions, a couple of them, for the University of Ottawa, just like Carleton, and they can all vote there. It's kind of interesting. It's a special provision, yeah. They don't have to, now they could try, I suppose, but they really aren't ordinary residents. It's only temporarily in the house they're living, aren't they? They're really from London. That's really their ordinary residence, but they can vote where the university is. But that is a good question. I think some try to do that. I think the bottom line, as long as somebody doesn't try to get to vote twice, I mean, that's sort of the bottom line here, right? You're entitled to vote. Anyway, we make it a little easier for students. Now, what about candidates? Same basic rule. If you're a candidate, again, you only have to be a Canadian citizen and be 18 years of age on polling day. Basically, that's it. There used to be some prohibitions. Judges couldn't vote at one time. Prisoners, we've changed all that. So there are actually polling stations in our penitentiaries now. People vote in penitentiaries. The only prohibitions I'm aware of is if you're convicted of an electoral offense, then you can't be a candidate for 7 years. Or if you're a former candidate and you haven't filed all the necessary papers from the last election, Elections Canada can say you can't run until you file the papers from the last one. Sort of a technical thing. And the only other one is that you can't be a member of a legislative assembly. You can't be, on the day you file your papers, you can no longer be, like say you're elected to the Ontario legislature and you want to run for parliament, that's fine, but you have to resign your seat. And MLAs cannot be elected. I think it works vice versa, but anyway. But other than that, there's virtually no prohibition. Anybody can be candidate, and you don't have to The other thing is you could be a candidate in a riding you don't live in. You don't have to reside. Now, most people do, but you can run anywhere. And there used to be a time when you could run more than once. I was mentioning this morning that at one time, Sir John A. Macdonald, who was the first Prime Minister of the country, a particular election, he used to be the member from Kingston for years, and he was actually worried that the Liberal candidate was going to beat him, so he decided to be the Conservative candidate in Kingston, but also Victoria, British Columbia. You could run in more than one constituency. He ended up being elected in both, and then he had to choose, and he decided, I think I'll sit for Victoria. Right? It's the new province, and I won't sit for Kingston in this parliament. He actually sat for one parliament as the member of parliament for Victoria, British Columbia, even though he was from Kingston. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think you can't. I think you can only run in one constituency. Be nice, I guess. I guess you get elected in two places. You can't sit for two seats, so you have to choose which one, if that was still the rule. So there's that. The other thing I want to talk about, okay, there's that. Eligibility to vote, eligibility to be a candidate. Well, one thing about candidates, one of the rigidities of our party system, if you are a candidate and you want to have your party name on the ballot, Conservative, Liberal, because a lot of people vote for party, don't vote for the name. One of the things you have to file with the returning officer when you're filing your nomination papers, along with signatures of other voters and so on, is an endorsement, a signed, sealed, endorsed letter from the leader of the party, certifying to the returning officer, John Small is the duly nominated Conservative or Liberal or whatever candidate for this is entitled to. And that's important, and there's no control. If the party leader doesn't give that, then you can't be on the ballot as an official candidate. This gives a lot of power to the national parties through the leader to control the nomination process. And Dina, I don't know, you might want to say something about that, because you're being someone who's been nominated and run for parliament. Anything you want to say about that aspect?
No, I'll just say, just very quickly, because if you look at what's happened, for those of you who've been here for a bit with regards to Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was a member that was forced to remove, she couldn't go back, even if her Liberal Riding Association said, hey, we want you to run as a Liberal, because now she has to run as an independent, which just goes back to Mike's point. Independents may get elected one time, but they have a hard time because the party system is so strong here. And I like to say, we could go back over history, and if someone got elected twice, it would be very rare. We've got two independents that were removed by the Trudeau government. One was Jody Wilson-Raybould, the other was Jane Philpott. I believe that Jody Wilson has a shot this time around because of her popularity, standing up to the Prime Minister, stuff like that. I think in the other case, Ms. Philpott will have a tougher time, because that's a riding that we won the election before, and she won it by a slim margin. So with the split vote, it makes it very difficult for that to happen. So
Yeah, and both those ridings, those ladies, former cabinet ministers, are running as independents, but there's also an official Liberal candidate
right
in each of those constituencies. And I'll just make a sidebar. We sometimes, politics can sometimes be manipulative, and I have a friend of mine actually from Vancouver, and he had a friend who lives in her riding, and he's a good Conservative. And I said, well, you're supposed to vote Conservative, but Conservative can't win the seat. So I would suggest you vote for the Independent. At least you defeat the Liberal, kind of a strategic. And a lot of people think that she was a very courageous